All right. Uh, well, good day, good afternoon. Dr. Jayshree Seth is joining us today for a great session that I'm really personally looking forward to so much. In fact, just a quick trivia about getting to know Dr. Seth on this program, and it's basically her book, and she was sharing her journey and her book on a segment on Cheddar. And I turned around from my pandemic seat here that I've been spending for 9 months, and saw the book. Really got keen on the essence of the book, but also the message about the heart of science and how can you leave the imprints like engineering fingerprints and imprints. So got curious, and Dr. Seth has been very kind to respond back quickly, and we got to this program. As this sessions have been primarily around our Society of Mentors program, and the Society of Mentors program is about encouraging people to join the digital journey. And the digital and cyber has worked together to make sure that we can do more. We are equipped with more tools and technologies that we can live our life on even if a pandemic hits us. And what better to do when you have the scientific progress tying the digital lives that we have together and cyber securing that digital life. So, Dr. Seth, welcome to this program. I should formally ask if you're calling Jayshree is okay, or Dr. Seth.
No, it's Jayshree. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm so glad that you could find some time. I know you're busy and probably got something after this. So let's get right down to business. I've been always curious that scientists have definitely a very busy and thorough life, and there is a scientific venture, and then there's a professional career, right? And you have an interesting title of chief scientist and chief scientific advisor. Between the two, I would like to know a little bit about your background, leadership journey that you took to bring science to the forefront. So the stage is yours, Jayshree.
Well, truth be told, I didn't think I was a science and engineering type when I was growing up. I just wanted to see how I could improve lives and make the world a better place. But I grew up on the campus of one of the oldest and most prestigious engineering institutes in India. And I was surrounded by STEM professionals, scientists and engineers. I did well in school, but I was drawn to fields where the contextual pull of helping people was strong. And there were really no women engineers to be found anyway. And frankly, I didn't quite see the connection of my communal mindset with STEM fields. But I had very strong parental guidance, let's just say, and it was best to just go along. Many of your reviewers who grew up in India can probably relate. Slight problem though, I didn't get in. I didn't get into the school, the very campus of which I grew up on. And I thought, okay, I guess I don't have to be an engineer anymore. But my parents had other ideas, and I was surprised how committed they were to, my engineering education. And they said, well, we were committed to it. So I went all the way down south to actually study engineering. And it's interesting, for many people, they may think, oh, it's just going from one place to the other, but it's quite a different experience going from extreme north to the extreme south of India. And so I had to learn skills, and I had to survive, and I had to thrive in essentially an environment that was very unfamiliar to me. So it turned out to be actually quite a crucible experience.
Wow.
And then long story short, I ended up in the US for graduate school. And it's here when I was in my master's program, I was actually doing a computing project. So it was modeling of crystal growth and how it's going to grow in space. So I would sit on my computer all day long while everybody else was doing different experiments. And that's when it's just hit me what I now know is called communal goal incongruity by psychologists and sociologists. And what it was is this what I wanted to do with my life? Like, am I doing what I thought I would be doing? And it just hit me hard. And unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to build a context around my computer-driven project. And I just thought, I'm going to have to do something different. And so I switched projects from my master's to my PhD, which is something that people don't do normally. I don't know how it is now, but back then it was kind of frowned upon. And I just decided that I'm going to switch because I could develop this communal context around this other project. It was so important to me that I was willing to start over. Turned out to be another crucible experience where you have to rely on yourself and your ability to actually learn this new information. So that worked out for me. And then I came into 3M literally through the back door, because 3M doesn't hire. They only hire from like the top colleges. And you know, I was as a summer intern and I got this opportunity to continue as a full-time employee. And that was also in an area which was completely different from my PhD project or my master's project. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to be on the expert track, but I knew that by that time that I had a communal mindset, and that would be the cornerstone really of my success. So I just said I will work on this area because I could build a context around that as well. So essentially what I did was build a context that could inspire myself.
Wow.
Now that I look back, I wonder about all these girls, all these underrepresented minorities, all the young folks who we are missing out on in STEM because of the way we talk about what we do and what we don't say, which we should be talking about. So that has really become an important piece for my science advocacy work, is building context, because not everyone, obviously I couldn't build context around my master's project. Not everybody can, but it's so important when people want to do a good job and make the world a better place and solve real problems, problems that matter, improve lives. If we don't provide that context, you're not going to inspire. And that's the problem, how we teach, how we talk, how we track, and how we typify STEM. So that's kind of my journey. And the reason to drag everyone through it is to make sure people understand that it's very important to have this communal context for some people.
Of course. No, I think, you know, you gave a completely different dimension. I was actually not expecting that would be, I think, you know, scientists are focused on big, hard problems. They're focused on solving one problem. And this seems like, you know, two birds in one stone, right? You are contributing to science as well as the advancement of science and probably the adoption of science in a larger context. So that is phenomenal. And thank you for doing that. So
could I just mention one more thing? I think it's also important is for a kid who started out thinking that they were not a STEM type, for a student who struggled in graduate school, and for someone without a core expertise, I have still been successful. So that is another piece that is important to mention to people is we all have these self-doubt, but you know, I'm currently at the level of corporate scientist at 3M. I'm the fourth woman and the first woman engineer to reach this, the highest level of scientist, inducted into the 3M Hall of Fame, you know, awarded the highest achievement award by Society of Engineers. So I feel truly blessed. And that is the reason also to talk about this, because there are many girls, many creative students, and how many underrepresented minorities who are thinking, oh, this is not for me because of how it's talked about. So I just wanted to make that point. I think it's an important one. It's not bragging. I have figured out it's not when you're trying to be a role model. It's about saying, look, I did struggle all the way through and I never thought I was the STEM type. And look what, I've been successful, you know, that point.
That's such a great underscoring of the actual impact and the outcome, right? I mean, for you, the personal outcome is, of course, you are successful. Of course, you have reached a stage that you probably didn't think at a certain point in your career, but now you retelling that story inspires others to follow the, you know, same or similar model. I think absolutely. Thank you for bringing that out. Well, when you tie that your current role as or current career as a scientist, right? So let's tie that to your role as a chief science advocate. I mean, is there a story behind how was this created, and is it a traditional role that's in the industry, or this is something that is?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I was appointed 3M's first ever chief science advocate, and this was a completely new role that was creative. And how it started out is, at 3M we care about science, right? And we are science applied to life. That is our brand promise. And science matters to us, but we were very curious to understand what the world thought about science, and we couldn't find a survey that was recent and was done at a global level. So we had one done in 14 countries, 1,000 respondents per countries. We had countries developed and developing, and what we found was mind-boggling. Get this, 4 out of 10 said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. 4 out of 10. 32% of the people call themselves science skeptics. And in this population, 60% said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. But before you feel disheartened, I should tell you, they were taking the survey on their laptops and mobile phones. So science is invisible, science is underappreciated, science is taken for granted. And this was really something that told us that we need to foster a global conversation, because we have to bring science in the forefront. If science is not in the forefront, if it's not being talked about, if people don't realize that the car that they just drove, or the plane they just got in, or the Zoom call they just had, and how much science was involved in making all of this, technology that they so seem to appreciate, we're not going to have that many kids opting for science. Science is not going to be talked about in a positive way in the public, etc. So a new role was created, Chief Science Advocate, and I was asked to take this role on. And you wonder, what is this role? Why are we creating this? What am I going to do with it? And all of that. But when you see the results, you're like, oh my gosh, now I see exactly what I've seen in my daughter.
Right.
We tried to enroll her into a science program after school, and she said, Mommy, I don't want to do science. I'm not a geek. So you've got all these issues. I mean, she's a daughter of 2 Ph.D. scientists. So you know that there's this media issue also out there. So I took that role, and I decided to attack it as A, B, and C. And it was about A being for raising the awareness and appreciation of science and moving people away from this apathy they feel. B is about breaking down barriers and biases and boundaries, and the kinds we talked about, the media portrayal of a scientist, of a genius, a maverick, evil, loner, geek, nerd. All of that is not going to inspire many young folks, certainly not going to inspire many young girls. And then C on that note is about context and championing in a way that is important to people, which is science solves problems. You can improve lives. You can help others. You can solve grand challenges. So it's the context that's important. So that's the sort of strategy I'm following in this role. And then, of course, learning a lot from others and listening and observing what others are doing and trying to figure out what resonates with the public. So this has been a very interesting role for me. Mm-hmm. Again, if you think about my background, I wasn't somebody who thought they were the science type, but I've gone full circle now on this and trying to energize not just everybody else, but even in my own home, my own daughter, because raising a son and a daughter, I clearly saw the difference. My son was enamored by the content of something, but for my daughter, it was always the context, always the context. And the context is so important to inspire everyone, because we need everyone to have a seat at the table in all their diversity that they bring in order to solve the problems that we have. So it's a very important role, and I've really sort of grown into this role, and I'm really thinking that it's an impactful role.
Well, I think you are probably seeing the example being exemplified in your own family and home. I think that's an essential element of being a parent, and that's the third role probably we have to go to
yeah.
about, right? But and just talking to you and your presence in the in the social media advocacy work. Do you see? I'll deviate a little bit from the science part, but also from the science to the communication part, which is basically another gap that I see with technologists, with scientists, and someone like me. And I'm a pure introvert, but I have to force myself to do this because I believe in it. And is that something that you see as another trait that needs to be brought out in scientists? Because you're an advocate, you need to be advocating, right? And the communication piece is so important.
Yes, it is so important. The science communication specifically for the public, because if there's a chasm between the public sentiment and what the scientists are saying, how it plays out, not very positively. And so there are so many elements of this that are so important that people communicate in a context, which is a very human context. I like to say, I give you my spiel. The real shtick is STEM, science, humanities, technology, engineering, and math. And the real thing there is to provide a very human context and a human face to it. And that's not just for science professionals. It's also for the public and for bringing them along as you are trying to implement science-based solutions. You need to warm them up to this, and you can't just provide facts, data, and evidence. You have to provide the whole story, and the story is rich with context.
Right, right. And how much of this is, especially with your respect to your role, how much of this is you think that business deciding, or the industry that you are in, because 3M is engineering at core, science at core. How much of this is the industry or the organization that you are in versus the rest of the world? How can we get them there? I mean, you are probably one of the pioneers in this space, especially in the advocacy of science, not an organization, but as a person even, right? Where do you see the other organizations taking this or embracing this model?
I think people are beginning to appreciate the importance of this, and it has played out in real time right now during the pandemic. The science denial and the pushback and the lack of understanding. But it's very interesting when 3M did the State of Science Index, which is the survey that I talked about, and if your viewers want to go check it out, it's at 3m.com/science index, and they can see the results that I talked about, where 4 out of 10 said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. We have done it systematically every year, and 2020, we did it during the pandemic as well. And it's very interesting. During the pandemic, science is having a moment. In fact, we found that for the first time since we started tracking, science skepticism has gone down and trust in science and scientists is up. So it's a very important moment in time for us to advocate for science, because you realize when you put the scientists in the front and center, and people saw it all play out, they realize that they want science to get them out of this pandemic, because this is a rare opportunity. Virtually all of humanity, we're all facing the same threat, confronting the same sort of fear, and all waiting for the same miracle and gift of science in the vaccine. So I think people are seeing that science is going to lead them out of this. And our survey totally indicates that it's a moment in time for science. So we have to really grab hold of that and provide that communication on an ongoing basis, not just in a crisis situation, because you see the crucial role that science plays.
Absolutely. And I think, I hope we don't have to have another pandemic to take the lesson home, right? It's just incredible what we learned in just 1 year of humanity's suffering and pain. And hopefully the hope will continue and powered by science, so to speak, right? Now, as you probably, lived through this pandemic in terms of making sense of what is right and what is wrong. There's a lot of information out there. As a scientist, how do you go about gleaning through that information and honing on the ones that are actually factual? And the reason I ask this is because there's so much misinformation, misconception, and that also leads to skepticism, right? So as a scientist, what is your model or framework to get to the right information?
It's basically about the scientific process, right? You have to have the critical mindset. So you have to have the curiosity, but then you also have the critical thinking, and you only trust the sources that over time. How do you trust them? So you have all sorts of triangulation methodology built in, which tells you which are trustworthy sources and how have their studies being done, etc. But it's not just about the scientists, it's about the average people, right? So what is the average person going to trust? And what's interesting is through our survey, we also found that people are, in fact, and we are all worried about the infodemic. You just mentioned it. And I've been very worried about it. I get texts from India and other places, and I'm just like, please ignore, please do not forward this. This is not factual and all of that. And then in our survey, interestingly, we found that people are not trusting their social media as a source for scientific information. So that was very, relieved to hear that people are actually saying science-based organizations, scientists, that level of trust is higher compared to, corporations were next, and then the last was actually social media. So somewhere deep down, I think people are realizing that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and then everybody's gravitating towards the information that can be counted upon. Now, the trick is people are going to get there intuitively. Some are going to talk to others. Some are going to refer to scientists. Some are going to follow the big name scientists that they have heard. So I think this is a responsibility for the science community to make sure that this process that people go through leads them to the right information. But out of all of this, the most critical piece is this: the scientific process is based on debate. It is based on discourse. It is based on dialogue. It is based on discussion. And scientists will change their mind. And thank God they do, because they get new data that becomes available. This is the big learning that we have to make sure people understand. Because people are saying, give me the answer. Well, there is no answer. This is the best answer we know at this point. Until more information comes in, till more data is gathered, till more discussion happens, till more scrutiny of this data happens, we cannot give you the next level of recommendation. And when that comes, we will give the recommendation. It may just build on the previous one, or may change slightly, or may do a complete about face if there's surprising data. So this is the best thing that I believe has come out of the pandemic, because people are like, oh my gosh, science. Then they realize, okay, the scientific process, because it has played out in the public forum. And that is a unique opportunity to train people, because it's easy to politicize science when you think, oh my God, they changed their mind. Well, that is exactly the process. So what I'm saying is the duty of the scientists and science-based organizations and people who people place trust in is to tell them, this is how we gather the information. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. And this is what we're working on to find that out. And we will let you know when that happens. So it becomes a healthy relationship. And the way I like to say it is the science of health for the health of science.
Wow.
Science of health for the health of science, because our health was involved in this. Science got personal, and people got very interested in it. And this is a unique opportunity for us to build on that. So I say 2020 is the year to stem skepticism. And here, what I mean by that is, science for health, health for science, the technology and sociology of trust. That's a very important key relationship that has become, evident. People are not trusting what we thought they are going to trust, which is like random infodemic type of information, which is great for us, because trust is a very fluid concept and nobody can tell exactly what it means. For E, I have, engineering of sustainable solutions. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, although health has been the main focus, people are still saying, oh yeah, we shouldn't take our foot off the accelerator on sustainable solutions as far as environment is concerned, because they also saw the pictures of dolphins swimming while humans were taking a pause, and wildlife returning and all of that. So I think that's an important one. They want sustainable solutions. We also can do sustainable solutions as it relates to the talent pipeline, because sustainability is top of mind, improving lives and health is top of mind. And it's very interesting. We have enough research out there which indicates in order to get underrepresented minorities involved, they like the more pro-social goals science has. So we have all these problems that we face, and we have all these people who will be more energized and inspired by pro-social goals. Putting them together gives a sustainable solution for a talent pipeline. And for M, I say it is the math of accountability and equity. People want diversity, because in order to adopt their science and to accelerate science, in order to have creative solutions, they know that we need that. And we require everybody to sort of take a step up and try to work towards this equity that we are obviously lacking in some of these fields, yours and mine.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think inspiring people needs inspiring examples, right? And also carving out a path for them, setting the examples that you have done. And I think you're inspiring other people is definitely essential for lifting up both I think the appreciation of science, but also application of science, because in the pandemic we also saw how fast things became once it became close to health and life, right? One curious question I have around this space is there is a scientific process and things are pretty procedural. They have to be to retain the integrity of the process and the data. But at this point, we saw that it was really pushed hard. Where do you see the breaking point it comes when, or maybe the yield point comes when we think about taking a process and accelerating it, right? I mean, as a scientist, the things are pretty set in terms of what you want. Where do you see this going? I mean, there's a creativity process, and there's a creative process, and then there is a scientific process. Do you see they can coexist, do you think? Or What are your thoughts on that?
They have to coexist, right? They have to coexist if we have to come up with the best solutions. The question becomes in a highly accelerated mode, are all the failure modes being considered, and have they been given enough thought? I mean, it's just like at some point it can't be all about action. There needs to be enough advocating for thought. And I think with the right balance, which is difficult to get to in a situation like this, but I think with the best intentions, it is possible to do that. It's always going to be a tension between the two. But I think most people, most scientists have to navigate that constantly, especially in a corporate environment. You've got timelines and you've got things, and you have to figure out what's the best prototype at this point that can give you the information that you need in order to launch a successful product. It's kind of like that with the science and the vaccines and things like that, and being open to the fact that new information will become available and we'll have to pivot or do something else based on that. So I think the scientific process sort of holds you in good stead with its normal checks and balances, and especially the scrutiny that most of the studies and things like that get.
Well, thank you for that. Well, now let me come to the most favorite part of this. I mean, for those who haven't really picked it up yet, this is the book. This is the book. I think the background is not doing good justice, but I would say The Heart of Science: Engineering Footprints, Fingerprints, and Imprints. So why a book during the pandemic? And I've been tracking many other publications as well. And in fact, we promote a lot of books from our community. And one came out, as was well aware, and that's when I picked up this one. And there are so many other options, but why a book and why now?
Well, it's been a totally unprecedented year, right? That's certainly an understatement, right? All of us have the same sort of issues going on. And but it's also been a year that unmasked this pervasive nature of a virus that is systemic racism, catalyzed and crystallized perhaps due to the raw and revealing events that unfolded right here in Minnesota, not to mention the disproportionate impact that you see of coronavirus on communities of color. So just like many others this year, I've also gone through that whole cycle of shock and numbness, denial, anger, fear, panic, guilt, gratitude, and then hope, and then the intense desire to help and be productive with purpose. So I got this idea and I decided to compile my writings into this book. And I thought I will use the proceeds from the sale to fund education of underrepresented minority women in STEM. I mean, I strongly feel that those in STEM professions have a role in shaping the future of the world.
Absolutely.
And we can't not have adequate representation from women, and specifically underrepresented minorities. And given everything that has happened this year, it just felt so right to do it. And, I feel blessed to have this opportunity. So yeah, thank you for spreading the word. Spread the word, everyone. Get your copy, take a picture, share, so we can all be at the heart of a STEM chapter in someone else's life and truly engineering their future. And I hope the readers take away at least two things for sure. It's exactly the same message I gave that day when you heard me. What is really at the heart of a science journey? That there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what science is, what scientists do. And I want to let women and underrepresented minorities and young folks know that just because you think you have, pro-social goals and a very communal mindset and you want to make a difference in the world, that STEM is not for you. It is for you. And those goals of helping people and improving lives have been at the center of my journey. And I talk about that in the book. And I want them to know it's not just about where you reach and what you did, but also how you do it. So I give a lot of examples from my career and my thoughts and reflections and insights, and give points to ponder to hopefully inspire others, because the footprints and the fingerprints matter, but also the imprints you leave on hearts and minds. And on that note, it's just not what people take away, right? Because as a reminder, all proceeds will go for a scholarship for underrepresented minority women in STEM, which will be administered by the Society of Women Engineers. So they are giving something as well when people buy the book.
That is incredible. And in fact, to be very honest with you, that's what hooked me in personally. And I'm sure a lot of folks that I have spoken to so far, they're like, this is it. I mean, why didn't we think about this before, right? I mean, a lot of us aspire to, or even try to find inspiration and motivation to put our thoughts together, but what a way to contribute and a lasting influence, right? As well, I think in terms of the work itself. So, in terms of thinking, how can we apply? And then I'll try to be kind of very candid here. I mean, you have many aphorisms here, even very very specific ways of coming up with making this sticky, right? Like sticky notes of that you leave. What is your favorite one, and which ones do you think we should kind of are more generic, and which one are personal to you? I don't know if you can answer all of that, but you can imagine this is very curious. I really like the stickiness of each of the points that you made.
Yeah, you mean like Post-it notes, a wonderful
Yeah,
3M product. Yeah, I always have liked words and mnemonics,
Post-it notes.
which help you remember things. And I've adopted this kind of acrostic style throughout my book, as you said. So let's see, favorites. Well, that's always a tough question. I'm going to answer it this way. There are ones that I get asked about most often. For example, how do we get more girls interested in STEM? How do we address the problem of underrepresentation of women? And the way I say it is that we need a good, solid steam cleaning. So the mental sticky note in acrostic style is S is for shattering stereotypes. And really the myth that only men can be scientists and only men can be leaders. And more importantly, that the only way men do things is the right way. And that's the default. So that notion especially needs to be shattered in very male-centric fields like ours, right? T is for telling the wholesome story about science. It has been very content focused, and that works well for men and boys, but to inspire more girls, as we talked about, and young women to connect with their communal mindset of helping others, we have to focus on that part also. And frankly, the younger generation boys and girls are inspired by that. E is for environment and exposure across the spectrum again, showing the possibilities, addressing myths about loner scientists with one genius moment. All of this can help increase commitment to, continuing and contributing and keeping that engagement and enthusiasm. A is for allies and advocates, and men need to be playing that role. It's not a zero-sum game. We will all benefit from it. And finally, M is for metrics and measures. Let's just face it, some things will not change without that. And we can all talk a good game, but the numbers stay where they are. So, at companies like mine, our leaders have set some bold diversity goals, and they're making it happen and forcing a change in mindset with metrics and measures. So we all have to join forces to sort of push this train on the right track, and it'll be a steam engine that could. That's what I'd like to believe. Another question that I get often is what can I do to help? I'm not a scientist, but I want to promote STEM. And I say, you don't have to be a scientist. There's a lot you can do to help STEM, to help sponsors, teachers, enthusiasts, and mentors. And you can help them by giving your voice. And voice is V is for volunteering. Many, many opportunities to volunteer in schools and at science and technology fairs and taking kids to museums and lots of things. O is for organizing. Many communities lack the connections to facilitate events such as, STEM career days. If you have a child in school, you can email their teacher and proactively ask if they need any, specialists or any help in organizing events. You can ask your company's HR and philanthropy teams about organizing mentorship programs with local nonprofits. I is for inspiring. Show kids how science solves problems. You don't have to be a scientist to do that. You discuss the resilience scientists have developed, to solve problems and how they address setbacks and inspire them to solve them. Then there's championing. C is for championing, making the case for science-based program and funding in your community or through the company that you work for. Champion to bring more STEM tools in your local schools and communities. Through corporate or civic involvement and advocacy, you can improve that perception about science. And finally, it's simply engaging. Let the ordinary seem extraordinary. Engage in conversations that draw out natural curiosity and wonder, and engage in learning together. Discuss the things around you that might seem mundane, but they're anything but. So you can give your voice by volunteering, organizing, inspiring, championing, and engaging. Many, many more in the book. Just try to make it, easy to stick.
Go buy it and read it themselves. These two examples seal the deal.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Anybody who loves that acrostic style, I'm so happy because that's the stuff that that book is all about, to make it
There's no
easy to
other way to
remember.
remember this complicated affair. Let's put it that way. Well, now I'll come to a very, it's a very selfishly, I think I want to bring this to cyberspace. We have a very, very, a huge gap to fill in terms of talent in cyberspace. There are 3.5 million unfilled roles, of them about 20 to 30% in the US. In the pandemic, this has only grown because everything is now digital, more connected, remote, and there are so many. I think the front end center is ransomware all over the place, and we cannot get talent and new people, new career entrants in this space fast enough. And your book applies to the broad sector, but I think cyber is such a durable career. If somebody gets in, what are your thoughts on applying it to a certain field? I think we spoke about a certain industry, but what about certain domain within this technology field?
Yeah, in fact, when you first reached out and we talked about this, I was just actually thinking about that. The movie Hidden Figures and the women as computers with incredible math skills, and the fact that women have been doing, cyber intelligence and security, and there have been pioneers like Grace Hopper,
Yep.
and the stories of women who secretly served as code breakers during World War II. So it's certainly not the case of capability, right? I mean, it's not. And in the early days of computing, the work was largely done by women. And when computers suddenly became indispensable and associated with great power and influence, female programmers were sort of edged out, despite having all the requisite skills. And unfortunately, in many cases, the industry's legacy of bias, if you will, continues because the jobs are now located in very male dominated fields and they are filled with male dominated, men's resumes. So now it's time for men to stand up and be allies and vocal advocates at work and at home. I mean, girls need to see more young women in tech roles, and young women need to see more role models succeeding in tech and believe that it is an environment that will allow them to have fulfilling careers and lives. So to answer your question, what strategy to use to sort of increase diversity in cybersecurity? Because as you say, people are not able to fill their jobs. My answer pretty much remains the same. You have to create context. You have to change the narrative so girls and underrepresented minorities are more interested in the field. There's a classic example that the Girl Scout CEO gives. That when asked about cybersecurity, girls weren't interested. But when they said, okay, who wants to protect their grandparents from hackers? They were very interested.
True.
You see, the focus has to be on the context. Also, the leadership has to be really committed to actually trying to understand and yearn for figuring out why things aren't working and why they absolutely need to change. And then they need to set bold metrics and measures. And as soon as you do that, you realize, now we need to start working with the entire spectrum and start engaging with it from early education to training, changing the context, changing the narrative, all the way to retention. So it'll force you to retool that organizational process to make it more diverse. So I applaud the efforts of organizations like yours in addressing some of these. And if you didn't notice, I did make it easy to stick. So it actually spells cyber. C is for create context. Y is for yearn and learn. B is for bold goals. E is for engaging the ecosystem, and R is for reevaluation to retool.
That is fantastic. That
Yes.
that's a real bonus. That is the bonus right there. So
But the story is the same. I just created a mnemonic for your organization, thinking about specifically cyber, because it's not that people can't do this. It's not that these jobs are something that are so restricted to one monolith. It's just not true. And so how do you change this whole system? It's again change that has to last. It has to be a sustainable change, so it's got to be done at that level.
that is fantastic. You would be quoted like ad nauseum from here. I think, just beyond science and into the heart of cyber. So this has been a phenomenal, almost an hour now. Time flies, right? But thank you so much. We can't appreciate enough the proceeds of this book in so many ways, and the contributions both financially to the scholarship fund, to the empowerment of women, and creating an example and a living example as such. And hopefully, there are more and more chief advocates of science that spread the awareness, but also professional role models who take a specific a profession and make it a career. And congratulations to all your success. We wish you all the best, and definitely all the best for the book, and we will be an able career taking it forward. So thank you, Jayshree. Thank you for joining us. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
this will not be the last one. Hopefully, we'll bring you back for actually a class or an audience that will gain directly from here. But this will do, and I wish you all the best again. Thank you for so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
And thanks for the support of my book.